And here Pragg sacrificed another pawn by going e6. And when you have your opponent blitzing out these moves, it can be quite intimidating, but here we see how Gukesh plays very good practical chess. Hey there, the 2024 Candidates Tournament is currently being held at the Great Hall in Toronto, Canada, and 8 players will compete to be the challenger of world champion England. After 10 rounds and with 4 rounds to go, we have 2 leaders, and one of them is 17-year-old Indian prodigy Gukesh, who even the former world champion Magnus Carlsen wasn't very optimistic about his chances.
Gukesh, what do you make of his first shot at the candidates? Is it going to go well?
I think he's not quite ready yet to make the leap, and I think it's probably more likely that he has a bad event than a very good event.
But so far, he's in my view playing the best chess. That's why today I decided to analyze one of his wins against another Indian prodigy, Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa, also known as Pragg. In this game played in the second round, Gukesh managed to outplay his opponent. Even though Pragg played a line that he had prepared for his game, Gukesh managed to outplay him by simply playing very good chess. So let's get started with the game here after the move d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to f3, knight to f6. Here we have lots of possible moves. Knight to c3 here is very common. But Pragg decides to go for the Catalan that we get after the move g3. White plans to fianchetto the bishop. And in this position we already have a slight surprise. Here Gukesh goes for bishop to b4. Bishop to e7 or d takes e4 are more common here. And after bishop to b4, here the move bishop to d2 is the main move in this position. These are subtle moves by top players. One idea being that after bishop to d2, now black plays the move bishop to e7. Even though it seems that black is wasting time, the bishop on d2 here is not necessarily well placed. Black might have ideas to go knight to e4, and the knight on e4 would attack the bishop on d2. So these are again just very subtle moves in the opening. But after bishop to b4, Pragg also surprised Gukesh here and went knight to c3. And here Gukesh took on c4. Here white is sacrificing a pawn, and as we'll see, white will sacrifice a lot more later on. But the main idea is that after taking on c4, white will sooner or later gain good control of the center by going e4. So here white continued with the move bishop to g2, and after both sides castled, here Gukesh went knight to c6. Other moves are possible, but here white has an idea to go knight to e5 that would attack the pawn on c4, so knight to c6 makes sense. And after a3, here black went bishop to e7, again subtle play by top players. Taking on c3 was also possible. But in this position white gets 2 bishops. Now the b file has been opened, so rook to b1 might be a follow-up, but this was an alternative. And after bishop to e7, one idea will be that after forcing a3, the b3 square has been weakened. Here Pragg continued with e4, and after a6, bishop to e3 and b5. So we see that white is a pawn down, but white is developing very quickly, having a strong center. So white has compensation for the pawn here. Queen to e2, bishop to b7, rook a to d1. Here Gukesh went knight to a5. The knight was blocking the bishop on b7, so now there's additional pressure on e4. And here white could continue with moves like knight to e5, preparing f4. So white has compensation for the pawn, but Pragg decides to be a bit sharper and he goes d5. So here black took on d5, and Pragg was really in the mood to go for a fight. He went e5 here. Taking on d5 was a lot more solid. Here white again has good compensation for the pawn. This pawn on d5 cannot be taken, or it is extremely risky to take. For example, after knight takes d5, knight takes, and bishop takes, we get this pin on the bishop, and white can easily get the material back. For example, after knight to e5, putting more pressure on the bishop. c6 seems to be holding the position, but here white has knight takes c6, and after knight takes and bishop takes, white has these very 2 strong bishops, so white is even the one playing for an advantage in this position. But instead Pragg went for e5, attacking the knight. Pragg went knight to e8, and here Pragg sacrificed another pawn by going e6. And when you have your opponent blitzing out these moves, it can be quite intimidating, but here we see how Gukesh plays very good practical chess, because these positions are not about finding the best moves, they are about not playing against your opponent's preparation. And what Gukesh did, I think, was very good, very practical, because he avoided the forcing lines that were definitely on Prag's preparation. So here the move f takes e6 would get another pawn, but this would definitely be the first choice that Pragg would have analyzed. And even though this might be playable, the positions that we get here are just very wild and not something that you want to play against a prepared opponent. So here one idea by white is to go bishop to f4, just putting pressure on e6. This pawn is going to fall, knight d4 and bishop to h3 may also come, attacking this pawn e6, which is a very important pawn holding this pawn on d5. And here black might try ideas like giving back material, for example rook takes f4. This is a move that I would consider because black has 3 extra pawns so far, but even here white has a way to keep the position very sharp. White can play queen takes e6 first, and if black tries rook to f7, knight to e5, attacks the rook, even though black can defend this rook, after knight takes e5, we get a mess and we see how all of white's pieces are coming to life, and this position is already becoming very scary for black, even though this might objectively be a position that black can hold. So Gukesh played a very good practical move. He went f5. It makes sense to move the pawn to f5 and not to f6 because black wants to bring the knight back to the game. And after knight to e5 and knight to f6, this is the first moment where Pragg took a lot of time. He went queen to c2, which was probably not the best move. Here white had an option to go bishop to g5, putting pressure against this knight, which is defending on d5, and then white might have ideas to bring a rook to the e file. So in this position white gets compensation for the 2 pawns. And after queen to c2, here Pragg's main idea will be to hold this pawn on d5. He even doesn't matter to give a pawn back. So here the move g6 was an option, but it would weaken some squares around the king. But instead Gukesh goes for c6, and his main idea will be to try to get some pressure against the pawn e6 after the move queen to e8, as we'll see. So here Pragg took a pawn, and after queen to e8 and knight to f7, now the position is pretty crazy. Here Gukesh continued with his plan of bishop to c8. There was an idea here to give an exchange by going rook takes, and after pawn takes and queen takes, black has 2 pawns for the exchange. The position is very wild, but I really like Gukesh's idea to avoid forcing lines that might have been on Pragg's radar. So here he went bishop to c8, and after rook f to e1, knight to b7, one idea is to go knight to d6, going for more trades. Pragg went bishop to g5, and here Gukesh played another very deep move, rook to a7. This rook will come to cover the 7th rank, and after bishop takes and bishop takes, here taking with the g-pawn is really bad. After queen to g4, we get a very nice checkmate, very weird checkmate pattern. And after bishop takes, one drawback of black's moves, they were a bit passive. So here Pragg found a very interesting way to create complications. In any case, white sooner or later has to do something where is a pawn down and this pawn e6 might become a target. But here Pragg found the very nice bishop takes e5, sacrificing a piece to get more activity. And after pawn takes and knight takes, white has achieved what he wanted, getting all of his pieces active, but in return white has given a piece. And here after bishop to e7, Gukesh still wants to go knight to d8, trading this very annoying knight on f7. And in this position, Pragg played the move queen to g4 in this very wild position. Just want to mention that here, Pragg had an option to keep the game very sharp after knight to h6, giving a check. If the king goes to h8, then after knight to f7, we get a sort of perpetual check if black goes king to g8. And here taking the knight is really bad because after pawn takes, this pawn is very strong. Or after knight to h6, if black takes, here there are some tactics against this rook on a7. After queen to g4, we give a check. And here if the king goes to h8, after queen to d4, we are forking the king and the rook. Or black might try bishop to g5 in this position. And here white has some options like getting the piece back after the move h4, bishop on g5 is pinned. Or white can even go to attack the rook on a7 after queen to d4. And we get a very messy position. For example, here going rook to a8 would not be a good idea. Black would have to give some material back, because here after the move e7 and rook to f7, knight to c7 is forking the queen and the rook. So the position is just very wild. one minor detail can decide the game here, because after queen to g4, this is a bit too slow because knight to d8 is just very strong. Now all the black pieces make more sense. The rook on h7 is covering the 7th rank, and black is trading this very strong knight. So here, knight to h6 was actually not good because after king to h7 and knight to f7, there's no perpetual. Black can simply capture on f7 with the knight. And after knight takes d8 and bishop takes, the game is pretty much over with correct play. White doesn't have compensation for the piece. Queen to d4, rook to b7. Now it's just a matter of how can black consolidate and win this game, which happened in just a few moves. After rook to e4, bishop to f6, queen to e3, bishop to e7. It's important to block this pawn e6, prevent some e7 ideas. And after h4, queen to c6, now black is finally activating his pieces. h5, bishop to c5, queen to g5. Black finally took this very important pawn e6. And after h6, here Gukesh, who is a very strong and concrete player, he simply took on f2. There's no threats against g7 because the rook is covering the square. And in this position, which is just totally lost, Pragg decided to resign. So hope that you enjoyed this very wild game, which I consider to be the best game played in the candidate so far. We still have 4 rounds to go, so the tournament is still fairly open and we might get more surprises. Let me know in the comments if you have any favorite to win the tournament. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.